Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Nabi al-Ummi, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walahu bi ihsanin ila yawm al-din. Today in America we celebrate Mother's Day. And as you know, mother has a very unique position in our culture, more so than the father. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِندَكَ الْكِبَرَ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُل لَّهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُل لَّهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. It is easy for us to remember these ayat, and it is easy for us to say that we're going to do this. Of course, we're going to do this, but it is difficult sometimes to implement it, especially that we and our parents are come from different worlds. They are from a different age group, from a different generation, and we are living in our own generation, and we are struggling with our lives as it is, and that puts us the requirement puts us in a situation where we have to assimilate. We have to pretend we are belonging to their generation so that we can empathize with them. And that is a challenge. Likewise, parents, in order for them to get along with their kids, they need to assimilate and think the way their kids think. And sometimes that is not easy. But it is a struggle, and it is a sweet struggle from the parent side and maybe from the children's side, although sometimes we don't realize it. I think all of you, inshallah, are kind of maybe you have it easy because you are away from your parents and you don't have to subscribe to the rituals of being barran biwalidayh. Bar meaning being dutiful to your parents. Of course, you have to be dutiful, but your duty is only about talking to them on WhatsApp or maybe Telegram and be kind to them. Being dutiful, however, means a lot more than that, as you know. And the best way to be dutiful in this month is to make dua for your parents. Remember them with Surah Al-Fatiha wa Salawat, and give it to them as a present, whether they are alive or deceased. Also, to pray 2 rak'ahs, just like you do at how, the same way you give 2 rak'ahs and you give it to Imam Hussein after ziyarah. You do the same thing to your parents. Pray 2 rak'at and give it to them, whether they are alive or deceased. Brothers and sisters, today I like to talk more about our financial obligation in general, and especially on the day of Eid. As we said last time, we talked about Zakat al-Fitriya or Zakat al-Eid, and we said that it is wajib on the day of Eid between the morning prayer and the Eid prayer. And Eid prayer this year will be either on Thursday or Wednesday. It is not clear yet, but the masjid will be open at 7 o'clock, inshallah, and the salat will be over by 8 o'clock. This is the schedule that I was promised, so that people who have to go back to work or to school, they know exactly their time frame. So it is between 7 and 8. That includes the takbirat and the prayers, inshallah. We are not clear yet whether it is going to be Wednesday or Thursday, although we tend to believe it might be Thursday. Having said that, I like to move to the second type and third and fifth type of our monetary obligation that is um, because of Ramadan. As you know, there are people who don't fast in Ramadan. These are people who have excuses, either because they are traveling or because they are ill and they don't feel very good. Also, there are people who are just afraid to get worse. For example, pregnant women who are truly afraid they might get dehydrated and they might harm them. Fasting might harm them. Those also are exempt from um, fasting. However, after that, after Ramadan is over, or immediately, these people are obliged to pay something called fidya. Fidya is an amount of payment you pay equivalent to three quarters the kilogram of common food, about between $2 to $3, and they must still make up the fast if they are healthy enough afterwards. So, people who don't fast because of an excuse, they have to make it up and they have to pay kafara. I'm sorry, fidya. That goes for people who did not fast because of a sickness or illness. The people who traveled during Ramadan and who did not fast because of that, they don't have to pay fidya unless they forget to make it up within a year. So, if you travel, you did not fast, then then you make up your fasting after Ramadan, preferably immediately. If you don't, and if you forget about it and keep delaying it until the next Ramadan, then you still have to make it up uh, and pay the fidya, which is $2 to $3 per day you missed. Okay, that covers fidya. What about kafara? Kafara is for people who intentionally break their fast without an excuse, without an acceptable exemption. In this instance, one must either pay, uh, one must either fast for 60 days or free a slave, according to the jurisprudence, of course, or feed 60 poor people. So people who break fast without a legal excuse, and people know what if they have a legal excuse or not. They can go back to their marja and their alim to understand if they have an excuse or not. For example, if you have a boss that tells you you cannot fast, now does that mean you have an excuse or not? That goes back to you and to your marja and to your belief. So, uh, if such a breaking of a fast happens, then there's something called kafara in addition to making up the fasting. So, in addition to making up the fasting, you have to fast 60 days or feed 60 poor people, or you have to free a slave. Of course, we don't have slave in this time and age, not in this country at least. So it is feeding 60 people or fasting 60 days. And if you want to feed 60 poor people per day, now this is per day, then you would have to do it immediately or as soon as possible. There is people also who cannot pay fidya or kafara, but they have people who are willing to pay for them. If that's the case, then that fidya or kafara is due immediately. If somebody comes to you and say, "Hey, I want to help you out. I want to pay your fidya," or you want to pay fidya or kafara for your parents, and you are able to do it, then do it immediately. Do without delay, inshallah. Uh, Brothers and sisters, there is also something else called daf' al-huquq, and that is important. It's obvious, but unfortunately, we have to mention it. Daf' al-huquq is primarily about paying your debt. People that borrowed money from people, they need to return it. Imam Hussein was asked one time about whether he would pay back that a person. There was I believe, a non-believer or somebody who is one of the hater of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein owed him some money, and people said, "Are you going to pay him back?" He said, if I remember correctly the hadith, he said, "Wallahi, if he wanted from me the sword that he was going to go and kill my father with, I would give it to him because it is amana. It is something that I owe to him. It's not mine." So this is the akhlaq, this is the ethics of our deen. You pay back what you have that people gave you, whether it is money, whether it is belongings, whether it is a promise. You have to settle with people. You cannot go to Hajj until you settle these debts, or at least make some kind of an agreement. And you can't let it go. You can't just ignore it and say, "Yeah, yeah, tomorrow, inshallah, tomorrow, I will pay you tomorrow." It doesn't go with the Muslim character. It doesn't. I don't know how can people do that. Is it pride that they cannot say, "I cannot afford it," or is it just thinking that they are victims? Let's hope that's not the case. Do we feel victims? This is one of the what they call madakhil al-shaytan, the entry of the shaitan into our nafs, is that he makes us feel that we are victims. And then, after we believe we are victims, then everything is halal. Then it's like you are, imagine you go into a shop of somebody that wronged you and took your money, and you feel that you want to steal the products off the shelf. That is not right. You cannot even steal that in that case. So I hope shaitan doesn't get into our souls and our nafs and convince it that we are victims. This can also happen in our relationships. You feel you are a victim. You have been a single man for a long time, or a single woman, and everybody's getting married around you. You feel like a victim, and then after that, shaitan can play with you, can make you do wrong things, can make you look at wrong things and have dhann and take you down a dark path because he makes you feel that you are a victim. Let's hope that does not happen to us because it is not healthy at all. So we have دفع الحقوق. You pay your حقوق. You pay your debt. You pay if you have zakah from last year, if you have kafara, or you have fidya from last year, or if you have khumus. Make sure you pay it without delay once it becomes due. There's something called Raddul Madalim as well. Raddul Madalim has to do with penalty. Penalty for not paying what you have paid. And I suggest that we all understand it from our deen, and we pay it as soon as it becomes apparent, because sometimes madalim and huquq are not apparent to us. You have to do your research. We don't have a government agency that comes to you and send you a bill. Some churches do that. Did you know that? Some churches in America will actually send you a bill and saying that you owe this to the church and you owe this to alms and whatever. And if you have a contract with the church, they will sue you and they will take you to collection. I can name you the churches, but I'm not going to do it here on live. But it does exist. In Islam, alhamdulillah, we don't have this. We don't have this in our center, in any center that I know of. You just have to be conscientious, and do your research. Know what you owe to people, know what you owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in time, and pay it in time, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make your life simpler and easier, inshallah ta'ala. Dear brothers and sisters, please remember us in your dua. Remember to be dutiful to your parents. And may Allah bless you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قال تعالى في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حملته أمه وهنا على وهن وفصاله في عامين أن اشكر لي ولوالديك إلي المصير. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Today, I'd like to talk about the topic of Mother's Day. In this country, we're celebrating Mother's Day. And in reality, every day should be a day dedicated to our parents and our loved ones. But in the spirit of what we're celebrating here, I'd like to talk a little bit about the subject of the importance of honoring our mothers, honoring our parents, and what that relationship looks like from a Quranic perspective. So first of all, we wish a happy Mother's Day to all of the wonderful mothers, the diligent, hardworking, dedicated people of sacrifice, our mothers who raise us and nurture us and give us life and give us love and give us hope. Congratulations and thank you for what you do. I first want to share the verse in chapter number 31, Surah Luqman, verse 14. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ. And the translation of that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have enjoined upon man goodness towards his parents. We have encouraged mankind, meaning men and women, to be benevolent and righteous towards their parents. His mother bore him, and in Arabic it says wahnan ala wahn, and this is defined in a few ways. One way that it is defined is weakness or exhaustion. So weakness upon weakness, meaning compounded weakness, continued weakness. It's not just weakness that happens one time, it's throughout the life. From when she is carrying him in the womb, to when he is born, to staying up those nights, feeding. Once the child can feed and clothe himself, then worrying about their safety, worrying about them studying in school, worrying about them getting married, worrying about them having children, worrying about them in every particular way. So it's weakness upon weakness, continued weakness, or exhaustion upon exhaustion is another way to define the phrase wahnan ala wahn. And his weaning, وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ, and his weaning was in 2 years, or was within 2 years, or is within 2 years. And we'll talk about what that refers to. أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ, be grateful towards me, God is saying, and towards your parents, because unto me is your journey's end. So let's talk a little bit about what this verse is. What is the verse saying here? Number one, it talks about a mother carrying her child. Nothing hard to define there. Women carry their children for an appointed term, for about 9 months. Sometimes it's a little bit less if it's a premature birth. But, mammals and human beings give birth in this way, that they carry. There's a gestation period. Some animals have a shorter gestation period. Some of them, I believe, have a longer gestation period. But for the human being, it is 9 months, about 40 days. And sometimes there's premature birth, and premature babies can survive, actually, even if they're born early. With modern technology and what's going on today with medicine, they're able to survive. But even with that, there is weakness involved. A woman who is carrying a child doesn't normally do everything that they do. They're told by their doctors to take it easy, right? Because there is a weakness, there is strain, there's physical strain and emotional strain on the body. So weakness upon weakness refers to a state of suffering, right? To live is to suffer. But why is it that women are able to bear children multiple times consecutively? Even though there's pain and there's suffering, there's weakness, there's exhaustion, the reason they're able to do that is like any other type of suffering. Once we make meaning out of our suffering, once our suffering has a purpose and a meaning, it becomes bearable. It's only the suffering that takes place in our life, or the exhaustion that doesn't have a purpose, that doesn't have a meaning, which hurts us, that resides within us, that we question, why is this happening to me? But normally, if we can make meaning out of suffering, then we don't question it. So we only question suffering that has no meaning. And think about your own suffering. You know, if you were able to right now see a highlight reel of all the suffering, the disappointment, the failure, all of that that's going to happen in your life from now until you pass away, how would you feel? Would you want to continue to live? Would you change anything? It's tough to say. It's tough to say that we see all of this, we'd be able to see all the suffering that's going to happen in our life and then still choose to go through it, because we try to avoid suffering as much as possible. But suffering that we can make meaning out of and understand, generally we're okay with. And if you think about in retrospect, maybe some of the things that you've suffered from before, and when you come out of the other side, you realize why this happened. Or maybe not why it happened, but what I learned coming out of it, or who did I become coming out of it. So this is what it means to make meaning out of suffering. So the fact that it's weakness upon weakness or exhaustion upon exhaustion refers to that point that it's part of our normal life, it's part of our normal routine to suffer. However, we need to be able to make meaning out of it. And what other beautiful meaning other than a mother giving birth to a child and the bond that is created through that process. So before we move on to what the verse is talking about further, I want to share with you a concept from Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, our fourth Imam. And some of you have heard this, but this comes from Risalat al-Huquq, the treatise on rights. Imam Zayn al-Abidin speaks about the rights of our family members, our brothers, the rights of God, the right on our children. And he says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ أُمِّكَ, especially, particularly with our mothers. وَأَمَّا حَقُّ أُمِّكَ فَأَن تَعْلَمْ أَنَّهَا حَمَلَتْكَ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَمِلُ أَحَدٌ أَحَدًا. Very powerful statement. He says, when it comes to the right of your mother, you should know, this is your mother's right upon you, that she carried you where no one else would carry you. A mother carries a child where? Not on her back when he is conceived. She carries the child in her womb. And nothing else is carried in the womb except for a child. So she carried you in a place where nobody else could carry you, in that very special place inside of her. So this is number one. Come to that understanding, come to that realization that in your most vulnerable time, you were carried in a safe space, a protected space, a place where you felt no hunger, you felt no thirst, you felt no need for, it wasn't too hot and it wasn't too cold. You were sheltered. It's like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Adam to the paradise and he said to him, إِنَّ لَكَ أَن لَا تَجُوعَ فِيهَا وَلَا تَضْحَى وَلَا تَعْرَى وَأَنَّكَ لَا تَظْمَأُ فِيهَا وَلَا تَضْحَى. That I am placing you somewhere where you will feel no thirst or hunger, and you will have shelter, and you will be protected. You won't feel cold or heat. This is the place that we are carried by our mothers. And then he says, and she nourished you with the fruit of her heart. It's such a beautiful statement. وَأَعْطَتْكَ مِنْ ثَمَرَةِ قَلْبِهَا. She gave you from the fruit of her heart. Such a beautiful statement. Meaning she gave you the best thing that her heart had to offer. And that which she gives, مَا لَا يُعْطِي أَحَدٌ أَحَدًا. The type of fruit from her heart that she gave to you is a fruit that nobody gives anybody else. Meaning that the love that she gave you is a love that she will not give anybody else. And this is true, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, a love that a mother gives to her children is even different than the love she gives to her own husband. And that's okay. That's fine. That is a bond that God has created between a mother and a child, which is special. It's exclusive. You can't get it anywhere else. You know, some people complain that my wife doesn't love me as much as she loves the kids. Well, it's just a biological thing. I mean, it's something that we have to live with. It's not necessarily less or more. It's a different type of love. And then he says, she employed all her essence to keep and protect you. Everything that she did, that motherly instinct to keep and protect you. She did not care if she herself went hungry while you were fed until you were full. We've seen instances with human beings and even with animals where a mother will feed her children, but she will go hungry. Or to go thirsty while your thirst was quenched, again. Or to have no clothes while you were well covered. She would rather cover you than cover herself. Or to stay hot in the sun while you were sheltered. She ignored her sleep for your sake. She protected you against the heat of summer and the cold of winter. She bore all that pain in order to have you, and you may have her. So she felt a need for you, a protective need, but she also did it so that you can have access to her as well. Meaning that it's not just a selfish thing. You know, sometimes with love, there's a selfish type of love. We want to protect something or someone because we are in need of it, right? If you think of when you love, I don't know, a car, for instance, or a type of food, it's not because that food or that car needs you. It has no emotions. You need it. That's why you are protective of it. But with a child, it's a different level of protection. You need the child, but the child also needs you. You should know that you are unable to thank your mother appropriately unless by God's favor. What does that mean? فإنك لا تطيق شكرها إلا بعون الله وتوفيقه. Meaning that only when God fully opens up your eyes, you'll be able to appreciate having your mother in your life. Without it, without having God's divine favor in your life, your eyes won't even be open enough to understand how special she is. So let's talk about the heart of a parent. You know, Imam Zain al-Abidin describes this so eloquently. And I want to talk a little bit about that, is that how is the heart of a parent and the concern of a parent described in the Quran? I want to share a verse with you. But before I share that verse, as I was thinking about this, I remember growing up hearing a story, and I'm not sure if it was one of Aesop's fables or something like that, but it was definitely a fable that told the story of a young boy who murdered his own mother, and he cut out her heart, and he started to run away. And as he was running, he had her heart in his hand, and he tripped and fell down. And when he tripped and fell, the mother's heart began to weep over him. The mother's heart began to console him. You know, when your child falls down, as a parent, instinctually, the first thing you want to do is run after them and pick them up and comfort them if they're crying. So even though he had torn his mother's heart out of her chest, it still comforted him. It still tried to pick him up. It still wept over him. This is the heart of a parent. This is the heart of a mother. It's that overwhelming sense of concern that we have for someone, sometimes even more than they have for themselves. And the Quran says the following, and this is Surah Al-Ahqaf, verse number 17. وَالَّذِي قَالَ لِوَالِدَيْهِ أُفٍّ لَكُمَا. So that term, أُفٍّ لَكُمَا, it appears a number of times in the Quran. And it's, you know, when you sort of grunt at your parents, when you sigh, or when you grunt at your parents. And he says, أتعدانني أن أخرج وقد خلت القرون من قبلي. Are you saying that I'm going to be resurrected? So it shows a conversation between parents and a child, that the parents, when they try to imbue him, or when they try to inspire him with faith, meaning that they try to remind him of his faith, he says to them, he says, "Uffin lakuma," you know, he grunts, and he says, "Do you promise me that I shall be brought forth," meaning I shall be resurrected? You're telling me about accountability and resurrection and the day of judgment. You're telling me this? And many generations have passed away before me. So basically, he's denying what they're saying. So their reply to him, وَقَدْ خَلَتِ الْقُرُونُ مِنْ قَبْلِي وَهُمَا, this is their reply, وَهُمَا يَسْتَغِيثَانِ اللَّهَ وَيْلَكَ آمِنْ. And they are in a state of istighatha. What is istighatha? Istighatha is when you plead something, when you beg for something. He's denying what they're saying, and they're begging him, not for their own sake. They're saying, وَيْلَكَ آمِنْ. Woe unto you, believe, have belief. Don't take this lightly. So they want for him to believe more than he wants to believe for himself. And that's what happens sometimes when we love someone so much. That's one of the downsides, or the weaknesses of love and concern, is that you sometimes want something for someone more than they want it for themselves. يَسْتَغِيثَانِ اللَّهَ وَيْلَكَ آمِنْ إِنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. That this is true. What God has said about the resurrection is certainly true. His response, فَيَقُولُ مَا هَذَا إِلَّا أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. All of this is nothing but fables of ancient times, this whole thing about resurrection. And so many children and offspring, they go through this stage where they believe they know more than their parents. And sometimes it is the case. Sometimes they have more knowledge, but having more knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you have more wisdom. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. And the primary difference between wisdom and knowledge is that wisdom involves a healthy dose of perspective that comes with time. Sometimes you have knowledge about a subject, but you don't have wisdom about it. Some of you are familiar with the term DIKW, data, information, knowledge, wisdom. And there's this thing called the DIKW pyramid, and it shows the hierarchy, or the hierarchical relationship between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So data starts all the way at the bottom. You know, you have data at the bottom, data turns into information, information turns into knowledge, knowledge turns into wisdom. When it's put into context, when it's studied, when it's applied, it reaches the top of the pyramid. So, just having data on something doesn't mean you have wisdom on that thing. So sometimes we do have more knowledge than our parents, say on a specific type of technology, or what's happening in the world of politics. We may have more knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have more wisdom. And those with wisdom always have a higher perspective than those just with knowledge. Hikmah, right? How that's described in the Quran is of greater value than just having ilm, just having knowledge on a subject. So this is when it comes to the heart and the concern of a parent, especially a mother, is that you love someone sometimes more than they even love themselves. Going back to the verse says, وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ, right? فِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ refers to the period of weaning. It talks about feeding that takes place. So what do we feed our children? And from the Islamic perspective, for those of you who are familiar with the rules regarding breastfeeding, that a woman who breastfeeds 2 children, if one of the conditions is that for them to become like brother and sister, is that those 2 children are below the age of 2. It's within those first 2 years. you know, it doesn't really happen so much in today's world, you know, in here at least in the West. But you know, back home, you have stories of you know, back in the day, how one woman would nurse two children, and you know, one of the children may have been hers and the other was not hers, but they become like brother and sister. So when they grow up, they can't get married, right? This is a concept rooted in Islamic jurisprudence, is that children who breastfeed from the same mother, they become like brother and sister, but there are conditions to that. The amount of times that they are fed, they're nursed. One of the conditions is that it happens within those first 2 years. And this is why the Quran says, وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ, that their weaning, their breastfeeding and weaning happens within those 2 years. So the significance of feeding, right? This is one of the roles and responsibilities of a mother when the child is born, is to feed them. You know, we learn about the significance of nursing. And, you know, when it comes to nursing, again, there's a concept in our jurisprudence which tells us that the first milk that comes from a mother, which in the Arabic language is known as libat, and in English is called colostrum, it's the first milk that a woman gives off after she bears a child. So from a jurisprudential standpoint, that first milk that is produced is so precious, it cannot be fed to anyone else except for the baby, meaning that it is that baby's right to receive that first milk. And so what's so special about it? And I looked this up, a few of the benefits, and it says that colostrum contains antibodies to protect the newborn against disease and infection, and immune and growth factors. So it contains immune and growth factors and other bioactives that help to activate a newborn's immune system, to jumpstart gut function and seed a healthy gut microbiome in the first few days of life. So the immune system, the child, when it first emerges from the womb into this new world, and there's the danger of microbes and there's the dangers of getting sick, and you know, if the baby consumes something that sits in the gut, it's very, very sensitive. However, that colostrum, it contains antibodies to protect the child against those outside dangers. And a few years ago, we had time that we were spending in the neonatal intensive care unit where premature babies are. And I had a number of discussions with the doctors, and they were saying that with all of the science that we have today, with all the advancements in technology, there is nothing as powerful and as effective for a child to consume than its mother's milk, including that first milk, the colostrum. Nothing. We can't engineer anything that's that powerful, because the properties from the properties that are contained within that colostrum are specific. It's specifically engineered for that child that is born. SubhanAllah, there's a special bond and a connection between the mother and the child that has to do with the properties found in that first milk that you can't really get anywhere else. So this is when it comes to feeding. So the question is, what do we feed our children? We know here in the United States and in the Western world, there's a big problem when it comes to what kids eat and childhood obesity, which is why there are laws, and there's lots of pressure on food companies to, for instance, reduce the amount of sugar that's there, even though it's still very prevalent. When we look at history, the idea and the idea of feeding is, one of the stories that comes up is the story of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Hajjaj was one of the governors of Banu Umayyah. He was the governor of Kufa, and he was known as a brutal man, a man who, was easy to shed blood and had killed thousands and thousands of people and left them tortured and dying in his prisons. And he was responsible for the death of some of the closest companions of the Ahlul Bayt, such as Kumayl ibn Ziyad, the narrator of Dua Kumayl, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, another noble, righteous companion. He chased another companion away, Salim ibn Qais al-Hilali. And so this man was so bloodthirsty and so twisted. I mean, back then they didn't have psychiatry, but he definitely falls under the category of a psychopath or a sociopath. But when you trace where that evil nature came from, we learn that when he was born, a report says that when he was born, he refused to feed from his mother. And so the shaitan appeared to his mother in the form of a person and recommended that he consume, as a baby, that he consume the blood of animals. And so he consumed that. Imagine, think about that. As a baby, consuming, instead of consuming the milk of his mother, consuming the blood of animals. No wonder he became such a bloodthirsty person. Another example, and this came up a few years ago, if you've heard of the term feral children, and feral children are children who are not raised by their parents. They're born and they're neglected and they're cast aside. Some of these feral children are raised by animals. There was a girl born in 1983, Oksana Malaya. She was born in the Ukraine in 1983. And she was neglected by her alcoholic parents at the age of 3. She was made to live outside. And so she found a pack of dogs to live with for 4 years until the age of 7. And by the time people found her, she had lived with the dogs, she had fed with the dogs, she had fed from the dogs, the mother dog, she had fed from it. And by the time that they found her, and you can look this up online, she had assimilated herself. She was no longer human. She had no human skills, no social skills, no interpersonal skills, none of that. And she'd bark like a dog. She would wash herself like a dog. She was on all fours, no language at all, because she was raised by dogs and she fed from them. And it was her alcoholic parents who neglected her. And even after going through intense rehabilitation and therapy, she's still somewhat intellectually impaired. So there's an ugly side to neglecting our children's feeding, not just what they eat, what they consume physically, but spiritually, what are they consuming as well? Do we keep an eye out on the content that they're consuming today? Because that's another type of feeding. It's another type of food. The Quran says, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ إِلَىٰ طَعَامِهِ. Let man look, let him observe, take a look at the food. Sometimes we eat something and we don't even look at it. We're in such a frenzy, and this is why the month of Ramadan is so beautiful, because it gives us a chance to sit around a table every night with our family, our loved ones, for those of us who spend time with them, and we get to eat. Usually throughout the year, we're kind of in a feeding frenzy. We're driving and eating, or we're watching TV and we're eating, or we're in a Zoom meeting and we turn off the camera so that we can eat. And we're not really paying attention to what we're eating. And the Quran says, pay attention to what you're eating. There's a story that says that one of our greatest scholars, Sheikh Murtada al-Ansari, one time he was asked about, how he became who he became. And he said that my mother, growing up, told me that whenever I was hungry as a baby, that she always made sure that when she breastfed me, she was in the state of wudu. She would get up and do wudu. And during those days, they didn't have running water. It could be cold outside. You'd have to go fetch water. But she would perform wudu before she breastfed me, because that made a difference. It made a difference. And the third part and the final part, I'll end with this quickly, is the Quran says, Anishkur li wali walidayk. Be grateful towards me and towards your parents. And what is gratitude? You don't have to be happy in order to be grateful. It's gratefulness that causes happiness, not happiness that causes gratefulness. So you don't have to be happy with everything. Sometimes the reason I say that is because sometimes people say, well, I didn't have good parents growing up. I didn't have righteous parents growing up. My parents never really cared. They weren't religious. They didn't teach me this. They didn't give me that. So what? Who cares? Be grateful. You don't have to be happy to be grateful. You don't have to be satisfied to be grateful. Just because your parents may or may not have done something doesn't mean you can't be grateful for it. And ishkur li wali walidik, be grateful to your parents for what they did give you, and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a story where I was reading in a book the other day where an author was talking about how the author said that he was receiving an award, a leadership award, and there was a young man who got up to speak. And the man said the following. He said, I never knew my father. My father never knew his father, but my son knows his father. So even though he grew up fatherless and his father grew up fatherless, he made sure that his son was not going to grow up fatherless, meaning that he drew a line in the sand. He was grateful for what he had, even though he didn't have much. And when we're grateful, God says, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ وَلَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are grateful, I will give you increase. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this day to allow us to be grateful towards our parents and to him. And I will end with this short dua, which is in the Quran, chapter 17, verse 24. It says, وَخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, and lower onto them the wing of humility, your parents, out of mercy, and say, وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. O my Lord, have mercy upon them as they raised me when I was small. This is a beautiful dua. رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Let us always recite this and hope that God is merciful towards our parents in the same way that they were merciful to us growing up. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات، تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات، إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك قاضي الحاجات، إنك على كل شيء قدير، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. So there's a question here in the chat that says, should a parent apologize for his or her children? Do children have the right to request such an apology? So I'm not sure if you're asking, should a parent apologize for or to their children? Sometimes we apologize for our children, meaning we apologize on behalf of our children to somebody else. Or should we apologize to our children? And do the children have the right to request such an apology? So I think you're asking, should a parent apologize to their children? There is nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's a powerful, powerful trust builder if a parent is truly wrong. Now, not if they're not wrong. Sometimes parents, they relinquish their leadership, their leadership responsibility, and they become like one author, he said they become like bullied parents, right? Some parents, they're bullied by their children. Anything that their children want, they get. And their children learn that all I need to do is throw a fit and I'll get what I want. Those types of parents, they overly apologize when their children don't get what they want. But if a parent truly makes a mistake, if they make a judgment and that judgment is incorrect, if they say something which is out of line, then they should definitely apologize to their children. It's one of the most powerful trust builders. I was reading one time in a book, it was saying that every interaction that we have with someone is an opportunity to either increase trust or decrease trust. Think about it. Every interaction that you have with someone, it's either increasing or decreasing trust. So with our children, it's the same thing. We're either in our interactions with them day to day increasing trust, or we are decreasing. Sometimes we decrease trust. Sometimes we decrease trust to the point that our trust account is at zero balance and we start to do an overdraft. That's when we need to start to increase trust again. And that's when we need to apologize. So sincerely apologizing is a way to increase trust. So yes, absolutely, a parent, if they are wrong, then they should apologize to their children, because that goes a very, very long way in building trust. Do children have the right to request an apology? They have the right. They do have the right. Again, if they are respectful about it, there's a right way to request an apology, and there's a wrong way to request an apology. If they are respectful, then they're as long as they're not abusive, they're not mean, they're nothing like that, then there's no problem in them requesting an apology from their parents. What should we do as a child if our parent behaves in a bad manner towards us? So the Quran lays it out. It says that the Quran tells us that وَإِنْ جَاهَدَاكَ أَن تُشْرِكْ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. Inshallah, I pronounced that correctly, but the verse is saying that lower your wings of humility, have a sense of humility towards them. However, if they force you, or if they make you head in a direction where you are going to disobey God, then in that moment you disobey them. You do not follow them, but you still treat them with respect. So treat them with respect if they behave in a bad manner towards us. It depends. I mean, what do we mean specifically? I mean, for some people, it's verbal. There's verbal abuse. For some people, it's not verbal abuse. It's financial abuse. Where the child gives. There's certain situation. I came across a situation one time. It was very sad, where the son was, a former athlete, and he was successful in his own right, but his father would call him for drug money. His father wanted drug money from him, and it was very, very hard upon the son. How do you say no to giving your parents, but you know that money is going to harm them? It's not going to benefit them. So you draw a line, you draw a boundary. I think yesterday I mentioned the book Boundaries, right? This is an excellent question if you're going to read that book, because it teaches us how do we draw a respectful boundary between us and even sometimes our parents. One of the examples that's given in that book actually is that if a parent wants to spend a lot of time with their adult children, but their adult children also have other relationships and other responsibilities, how do you navigate that? And if it's verbal, then just ask Allah to forgive them. That's the best thing. Just ask Allah to forgive them. Sometimes for us, it's very difficult to forgive our parents. Just ask God to forgive them. And inshallah, by that process, there is healing. Of course, for us, we also need to, I'm a big proponent of this, of therapy. If somebody is physically abusive or verbally abusive, we need to go through a process of therapy. Speak to a professional therapist. It's worth the investment of time. It's worth the investment of money to talk to someone, because they will help you heal. They will help you gain perspective. I'm a very big proponent. So if that's how, if that happened in your childhood or even in your adult life, then that's very hard to hear. But we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves on one hand, and on the other hand, we ask God to forgive them. Again, sometimes you never know. Our parents, they are a subject of their own parents. Sometimes our parents, they don't reveal how they were raised. Sometimes it's generational abuse. It's generational hurt going from one generation to another. So our parents sometimes they are subject of their own upbringing, how they were raised by their parents, who were raised by their parents. This is why we have to have grace and forgiveness, because we don't have the whole picture. We don't have the entire picture of how our parents were raised. We can only do the best in our situation today. So one is forgiveness, two is therapy. Those are the two things. And therapy might actually help you forgive even better, inshallah. Thank you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all, and inshallah you have a great rest of your evening. We will talk to you tomorrow, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum.